This is a Rondo RUUT. Now, I never thought I'd see one of these on the channel again. I used to be a massive fan of Rondo. In fact, if you look back at some of our earlier videos, you'll see that we quite frequently featured the Rondo RUUT, HVRT, I think it's called. Simon has one, absolutely loves it. And I actually built one for myself as well. And then they got really in bed with chain reaction cycles and wiggle, making it almost impossible for us to stock them and really work with them. And then it became really, really hard to obtain parts. But now they're back in the UK with a new distributor, and they came to us and said, hey, would you be willing to bury the hatchet and take a look at some of our new models? I was like, yeah, okay, let's see what you got. And then they presented us what can only be described as the cycling equivalent of a Tesla Cybertruck. So let's take a closer look. Now, when this bike came in, it did come with these wheels. In fact, it came straight from Bike Radar. I think it all came dirty. I've cleaned it. But the first thing I did was take away these wheels because I just don't trust these as far as I can throw them. And the cassette pretty much fell off from the box. So it's a real shame. It doesn't look like Rondo are providing frame onlys that you can then custom build and forego all the disposable wheel nonsense, which is a real shame. Also came with 38mm wide tires, which definitely wasn't going to cut it for a bit of Lake District gnarly gravel. So put them to one side and put my own wheels on, which have the Vittoria Mezcals in a 44. This would actually go up to a 45 if need be. And weirdly, it looks like there is loads of room at the front, but the back is still looking pretty tight on tyre clearance. Aside from that, some key features that really stand out are this bulbous CNC'd machine stem. It looks like it should live on a mountain bike or something. This aerodynamic fork, but then this big non-aerodynamic head tube. That's all a bit weird. Spank bars, which is lovely to see actually. I do like Spank. It's a real shame they didn't follow up and put Spank rims on those. That would have been really quite cool. Look, I found a log pile, and in gravel culture that means you have to stop, lean your bike up against it and talk about your bike. So let's just take a look at some of this. It is an incredibly weird bike. The size of that head tube is CNC machine stem. I was a bit nervous that it wasn't going to work with a Garmin mount, but actually it works okay. Very wide top tube. Weirdly, standard 27.2 seat post. We have this dreaded triangle situation thing, which has been discussed to death. We'll talk about that more in the studio. But one of the big things, it still uses the Rondo twin tip design, so like variable geometry. So the idea is down here, is that you can adjust which hole or position you put the front axle in, either a high or a low position. Let's get the front wheel out and take a closer look at this flip chip. 2mm grub screw. And you undo this, poke this out, and essentially just turn that around and do up the grub screw again. While we have that out, let's just take a look at a bit of build quality. So if you're going to do this sort of thing, you need to make sure that all these surfaces are lovely and flat, otherwise it's going to creak and creak and creak. But that looks pretty good. The other problem with this is once you do that, it's not something you can really do trail side because you're going to have to reposition your front brake caliper. So in this case, what you would do is this little mount here. If you want to flip this into the high position, you'd have to remove this completely and then mount the brake directly to the fork. So it's actually a different flat mount converter than what you're used to seeing. So these two bolts here go all the way through the fork, as opposed to bolted in from the back like you're used to seeing. Let me try and explain this a little bit better. So this is the diagram from the Rondo website. So it came to us in the low position, which means that the bike is at its highest. So the stack would be at its highest and therefore the root should be at its shortest. This does quite a lot of stuff with its geometry, and I've just been going through the geometry chart to try and make sense of this. So in the low position is probably when you're going to get the most technically off-road capable bike. It's when your head angle is going to be at the slackest. It's when your trail is going to be at the longest. Also means that the reach is at its shortest. Now, I already found this quite a long bike. So when you put it into the high position, essentially that makes the bike lower. So you get a lower stack, a longer reach. It also makes the head angle steeper and the fork offset and therefore the trail shorter. So therefore you end up with a more racier feeling when it's in the high position. So it's counterintuitive because it feels like you're getting lower and more racier when you put it in the higher position. So first impression so far, it looks and rides like it should be a monster cross bike. It feels big. It feels like it should have 2.2 inch wide tires, flared bars, somewhere between a gravel bike and a mountain bike. It doesn't ride like the race bike that you expect, except for this little design back here does allow the back wheel to be tucked closer towards the bottom bracket. So the back actually feels very nimble, very responsive, but the front feels much more like a more robust off-road monster cross type of feel. It's a very confusing bike. I feel like I need to do a few more miles. Look at the rear brake mounts here, and one, they are actually raised from chainstay here, which I do definitely like. And this is a lovely flat surface. There's no sign of any sort of paint on there. That is raw carbon. I'm quite impressed with that. The bottom bracket is actually T47 internal. That's a big win in my book as well. I'm liking this. Lots of bottle cage mounts. I'm not quite sure what those are for. Got a bottle cage mount there, a bottle cage mount there, and a bottle cage mount underneath. Up at the headset, we are relying on some slightly proprietary shapes, and the headset inside here is actually an Acros headset, which means that you're going to have to be buying some fairly expensive headset bearings from a particular proprietary brand, a bit like you would do if it was a Canyon you're buying. It's the same brand that Canyon use in their headsets. Okay, if you're liking this video so far, please think about liking it and subscribing to the channel, and get ready with your comments. I'm definitely looking forward to what you guys have got to say about this funky design. 40k of legit gravel, none of that chunky gravel that I'm criticised for riding sometimes on these bikes. And I can definitely say this is on the performance end of the gravel spectrum. So if you're a svelte racer who likes sort of gravel racing, I think you'll like this. And if you've got a persuasion towards the chunkier end of gravel, I think this will probably suit you. That slight nod towards monster cross. Doesn't respond that well on the really twisty stuff, which is surprising. It rolls over rocks okay, but it hasn't got that response in the twisty stuff to be really technically capable. And that's a shame, because its looks and its styling reminiscent of a Cybertruck would definitely suggest it's got more off-road capability than it actually has. Very confusing bike. Right, let's talk a little bit about this engineering, some might say catastrophe. If you just try and imagine, it doesn't take an engineer to tell you that if you take an impact here and this is your pivot, you've got an inherently weak structure here, and you've probably got this point here is the weakest point. Now you can overcome this by, of course, by adding material and therefore adding weight to make an inherently weak structure strong enough again. The reason that they've done this is to try and make the rear center a little bit shorter, but we're still rolling a 420 chainstay, which is still pretty long despite the efforts they put into to trying to make it shorter. The benefits of a shorter back end would make the back end a little bit more nimble and trying to keep the overall wheelbase a little bit more under control as you built the front out. I have to say, it did actually feel like that in riding. It did actually feel quite nimble at the back, but I definitely wouldn't say it was the most nimble I've ridden, that's for sure. The other catastrophe is this, because by putting this little kink in the tube here, essentially creates a weak point. So if this is going to fold at all, it's going to go straight to that point there, and that's going to become a weak point. You can get around that by engineering in more strength by adding material, and then of course you're adding more weight. With that said, let's get the scales on this. Now, considering this is meant to be their lightweight race bike, is sort of designed as the performance end of gravel, don't think this is going to be seen as the lightest we've ever seen. So we are at 9.8 kilos, not far off the weight of a giant Propel. In all honesty, I was expecting it to be heavier than that. So, thoughts on the Rondo RUUT, or is it RUUT, is I can't understand why they put all this effort into making all this aerodynamic and shielding the front brake caliper, and then having this aerodynamic brick of a head tube. That is so unusual. I do like the whole CNC look. I think the styling of this, it's one of those things where you either love it or hate it. And I'm personally a massive fan of design that divides opinion, because at least it either appeals to someone or it doesn't. And I think this has definitely got that striking design signature. It's definitely something different. This, I don't think was necessary at all. That just seems like it's building in an inherent weakness. This I'm going to leave up to material experts. You know, geometry wise of this inherent shape is definitely weak. And I don't know enough about carbon fiber to know whether you can overcome those inherent weaknesses with materials. I guess time will tell. If they start breaking, then I was right, and if not, then someone's done their research and knows how to build carbon properly in that. The other weird thing is it does look like it should be a big, bulky, gnarly bike, big tires and wide handlebars. It's got that sort of styling like a Cybertruck, and yet 38mm tires is probably the best if you're riding in muddy conditions, because stretching to a 44, 45 definitely is pushing what you can get into the back there. So it feels to me like the bike is quite big, and I almost want it to have bigger tires and feel a little bit more suited to more gnarly gravel, and yet this is meant to be a svelte, long, low racing machine. I just feel like the dualities in my head are playing out in the dualities of the love-hate relationship with the design. One more ride, I think.